Hello and welcome along to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. I'm your host, Matt Addison. Tom Beattie is with me as we discuss Liverpool's dramatic 1-0 victory over Paris Saint-Germain in the Champions League. Before we get stuck into that game, though, don't forget to get the best discounts off your NordVPN plan. You can go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. Our link will give you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. And of course, there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link with all of the information on that is in the podcast episode description box below. Without any further ado, though, Tom, let's get stuck straight into it. Harvey Elliott's last-minute goal was a big talking point, but Alisson Becker as well. I mean, he is the best goalkeeper in the world, so perhaps we shouldn't be surprised. But even he said that this was his best performance of his life. Just how good was it to watch him last night? All the PSG attackers had shots. All of them had chances, but none of them managed to beat him.
Yeah, I mean, they peppered the goal for 87 minutes of play, really, didn't they? And it was one of them nights where, you expected when one went in, possibly 3 or 4 might follow. But Liverpool, they just kind of maybe wrote the luck in the game. Obviously, the first half, Kvaratskhelia, his one was chalked off, obviously, for offside. And you can't really say that Liverpool grew in confidence, particularly, obviously, they kept on peppering the goal, moved into the second half, didn't they? And that front three, I thought, were electric on the night. Barcola, Dembele, Kvaratskhelia as well. And Vitina, I thought, behind them as well. He was kind of, pulling the strings for them throughout. And it was just a really difficult game. I thought the atmosphere seemed great in the Parc des Princes, and it was a typical European night under the lights, wasn't it? And, Paris certainly seemed up for it. But yeah, I think to kind of come out of that game with a clean sheet, it's a major achievement. And I think Allison was right to say it was probably the best game of his life. It's certainly up there in terms of his Liverpool career. You think back to the Napoli game, how pivotal that was in the Champions League winning run back in 2019. And possibly this could be another springboard that we look back upon and say that was a major moment kind of in this knockout phase now that we've moved into. And you're just kind of hoping now that second leg that Liverpool can kind of make the most of that advantage that they've created for themselves out of nowhere, really. And yeah, it's one of them where, you take stock of it. Obviously, I think they're confident coming into the second leg as well. I think Luis Enrique kind of put the onus back on his team to maybe put it right in that second leg, and he kind of felt confident, didn't he, that they will be able to do that. So we know the challenge that Liverpool are going to face in that second leg, and it just kind of re-emphasised, really, didn't it, the quality in Liverpool's ranks. And I think Allison is as important in goal as maybe Mohamed Salah is up top, and I think that game really showed that, I think, last night.
I think it was 27 shots that PSG had. I think 9 saves that Alisson made, and each one of them was just absolutely perfect in terms of the technique. The one where he stretches to push it behind the post. There was crosses that were coming in that he was pushing away and making the right decision. And everything he did, I don't think I've ever given a 10 in our player ratings before, but I don't think you could really argue with anything else, really. There was no element of that game he got wrong. Some of his passing, there was a pass early on in the game that was absolutely perfect out to the wing. I think it was to Luis Diaz on the left wing where he just pings it straight to his feet. I mean, every single aspect of his game, he was absolutely perfect in that game. And that can happen, can't it, sometimes in the Champions League? I think it was Ibrahim Konate said in one of his interviews after the game that, Liverpool expected it to be tough. They expected not maybe to have as much of the ball as what they normally do. Whether they would have expected it to be quite that extreme, I don't know. But sometimes that is how it is in Europe. Sometimes you do have to soak up a little bit of pressure. I think Liverpool maybe could have made it a little bit easier for themselves, but it's not complete luck, is it? I mean, there's a reason that they went out and bought Allison. There's a reason that they've identified him as the best in the world and a game changer to come in. It's for moments like this where, some of the saves he was making were just completely ridiculous. There's no other goalkeeper in the world, I think, possibly maybe bar one or two others, maybe a Courtois or an Oblak, but even them, some of them were so good. He's the best in the world, isn't he? I don't really know what more we can really say about him at this point.
Yeah, I mean, he combines them two aspects of what you need from a modern goalkeeper, doesn't he? That presence, I think, the likes of Oblak and Thibaut Courtois, they kind of have that dominating presence in the box, don't they, coming for crosses, which we saw last night with Allison on many occasions as well. And then the distribution that we saw for the goal, that kind of eye for a pass, and he was able to pick out Darwin Núñez down the other end of the pitch, and obviously he took down the ball and played it on for Harvey Elliott to score the winner. So it was one of them games. I think everything went perfectly for Allison, but we know he's capable of that as well. He showed that throughout his Liverpool career, and like to say, he faced, I think, 9 shots on the night, and he dealt with every one of them really well, didn't he? And it's having that presence, I think, at the back. It gives calmness, I think, to the rest of that kind of defensive unit. And people will say that Liverpool rode the luck, but I think, as you hinted as well, you kind of make your own luck, I think, in the Champions League at times. And Liverpool, although they faced a lot of shots, a lot of them, we said before coming on air, they were from outside the box, and they were maybe more kind of speculative efforts, really, weren't they? So, you can possibly, you can speak about the quality of them chances. And I looked at the XG from last night. I think it was 1.89, something like that. So, possibly, for the amount of chances and the amount of shots on goal, for PSG, that possibly didn't equate entirely in terms of, major chances in the game. And, so it was 27 shots for PSG last night, but, the XG kind of tells a slightly different story, doesn't it, in that respect? So, yeah, it was one of them nights, I think, Liverpool, they had to make their own luck, and I think Allison was a major part of that. And we see with this kind of leadership group within the team, and also that spine that people always talk about with this Liverpool team, Alisson, Trent, Van Dijk, I think Konate's kind of coming into that as well, Gravenberch, and then up the other end with Mo Salah. These are world-class players, I think, and, they'd be able to get in any team, I think, in Europe at the moment. And, they kind of showed that quality last night, didn't they? They were a step above. And, yeah, I think Liverpool, they had to ride out the pressure, I think, last night, and they got the reward ultimately. And I think Arne Slot made the right substitutes at the right times as well, and he got his rewards as well. The 2 substitutes, Darwin Núñez and Harvey Elliott, were able to combine for that goal. So, yeah, it was a great performance, I think, from the manager as well in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about Harvey Elliott as well. I mean, he was so often last season a super sub. It hasn't really happened so much this season until, obviously, this game. He's not really had too many chances, and Arne Slot has mentioned it last night. He's mentioned it plenty of times across the course of the last few weeks, really, in terms of, well, he's not playing because Dominic Szoboszlai has been so good, and obviously he's not going to get too many chances to play on the right wing when Mohamed Salah is there. And I thought Nuno Mendes did actually a brilliant job against Salah to shut him down, actually, for PSG. And it was a bold move, even so, though, to take off Salah and bring on Harvey Elliott. Obviously, less than a minute, he scored the goal, which proves to be the winner. So it was absolutely the correct call to do that. But I thought it was brave from Arne Slot, as you kind of said there, but a nice moment for Harvey Elliott as well. He's made it clear that obviously he's not played as much this season, but he still is a Liverpool fan. He loves being at the club. He still is very much wanting to prove himself. There's been obviously links away ahead of the summer and things like that, but it was a nice moment for him, wasn't it? And it was deserved, I think, for his patience this season. He's had to wait for his chance, but when you get a winner in Europe, it could be a pivotal one when you think of what could happen for Liverpool for the rest of this season. It was a really nice moment, I think, for Harvey Elliott.
Yeah, it was brilliant to see, and I wrote in a little piece after the game, sort of about that bravery that Arne Slot kind of showed it within the game itself, to take off your talisman, who's got you 30 goals this season and probably 20 odd assists as well. He's a game changer, and if you're gonna put your money on anyone to maybe get you a winner against kind of the run of play, you would have put your money on Mohamed Salah last night. But I think to take a brave decision like that and take off your best player essentially up top, it kind of, paid dividends for the manager ultimately, didn't it? And yeah, to bring on Harvey Elliott, 86th minute, and within 47 seconds he was able to get the winner. that's kind of, it's the stuff that the dreams are made of, really, for a player, and particularly for a boiled Liverpool fan as well. And I think he'll be fully aware of the players in days gone by where, they've made contributions from the bench and that sort of thing. David Fairclough, Saint Etienne, I think 1977. Divock Origi, we knew, obviously, in the 2019 run as well. So there's that lineage, I think, at Liverpool where you can always make a contribution, I think, from the bench, and possibly that's going to be a role again for him this season. You mentioned about maybe that little bit of frustration for him so far this season with injury, and I do kind of feel for him because, like you say, he's got Mohamed Salah on that right wing who scored 30 goals. It's going to be very difficult to displace him from the team, and Dominic Szoboszlai is probably in the form of his life as well, kind of playing in that midfield position that he takes up as well, that sort of number 10 role. So, it is going to be difficult to kind of come in as a starter, but I think he couldn't have done much better, I think, when he came on. He was calm and he got the chance. It had shades of Mo Salah, I think, the way he kind of opened up his body, and the finish as well. So, I think he can be a real asset from the bench. And, I've mentioned a couple of times on the show as well that he was one of the most used players, wasn't he, last year under Jurgen Klopp, and I think that kind of showed the esteem he was held under by the last manager. So I think Arne Slot will get use out of Harvey Elliott, and yeah, it was great to see that last night, and I think the joy was kind of written all over his face, wasn't it? And I think it was a major moment for him, possibly in his Liverpool career.
Yeah, you'd like to think there's maybe one or two more of those moments for him for the rest of this season. He's had a couple of difficult games. You think of the Plymouth game, obviously didn't go well for him. He's had one or two other moments where he's not really made a big difference off the bench. But that was, a bit of a reminder, I suppose, to the manager about actually you can throw him on and use him in these sorts of situations, and he can make a big difference. So it'll be interesting to see if that happens again. And I mean, you look at the weekend maybe against Southampton, maybe that's an opportunity for him, maybe even to come in and get a start, possibly, just in terms of the number of changes that I would make, particularly with it being Southampton. It's probably Liverpool's easiest game of the season on paper. Obviously, they've got lots of big games coming up as well that you'd expect Szoboszlai to be in there. Maybe it's a chance maybe to rotate and give him a little bit more time on the pitch, even if that's just off the bench for half an hour or so. But yeah, definitely good for him. You mentioned Darwin Núñez as well, which I'm glad about. He definitely deserves a mention for sort of the composure to set that up. We haven't always seen that from him, certainly in the last few weeks, so that's good to see. And Wataru Endo as well, I thought made a big difference. Maybe not quite as marked a difference as Salah and Elliott, but to take off Ryan Gravenberch, who's clearly the number one pick in that midfield, in that number one, in the number 6 position, I should say, to bring on a completely different player in Wataru Endo, I think is testament as well to how much trust there is in him at the moment. And what have you made of Endo in the last few weeks? Because I think my opinion has slightly changed on him. I think there was probably too much of a difference, really, in terms of what Gravenberch offered and what he offered, just two completely different types of players. But we've seen, obviously, against City, Liverpool were sort of backs to the wall, obviously PSG as well. It was the ideal game, I think, to see what Endo could do, and I thought he did really, really well when he came on.
Yeah, these kind of cameo roles from the bench, I think they almost remind me of James Milner, particularly in them successful seasons under Jurgen Klopp. Obviously, he's playing a slightly different role, I guess, but yeah, coming in for Ryan Gravenberch, maybe giving him a rest within games as well. That's been really important, I think, in terms of having fresh legs. And the experience he's got as well, I think, is majorly important for Arne Slot. And, he's got a bit of a commanding presence, I think, when he actually comes on the pitch. And we definitely saw that last night. I think he's always willing to show for the ball. And I think, obviously, as we reeled off the stats before, the amount of shots that Liverpool were facing throughout that game, he was always kind of there, to close down players and just kind of get in people's faces, I think, for that final 10, 15 minutes that he was on the pitch. I think he had 11 minutes in all last night. And, yeah, that kind of follows on, really, doesn't it, from the City game that you mentioned. I think he got 15, 16 minutes there. And the Newcastle game as well. They've kind of been quite similar games, haven't they, where Liverpool have had to kind of, see out a result. And I think he is carving out quite a unique role within the squad now, and I think that's good to see as well, because we know he's a player with quality. I think it's just that he's got different qualities possibly to what Slot long-term might be looking at. You know, you look at how he's used Ryan Gravenberch so far this season, and also the links with Zubimendi last summer. They're very different players, I think, to Endo in terms of profile. But in terms of getting full use out of Endo, I think it could be a role that he could play for maybe the next season or season or two, really. I've been really impressed with him in recent weeks, and I think to have an asset like that from the bench, particularly in the business end of the season, when Liverpool are having to see out games and it might be pretty, you know, I think that's really important. And like you say, obviously we've got the Southampton game coming up and then the PSG return like 3 days after that. So, you know, that fixture congestion, you know, possibly it might be the right time, the Southampton game, to give Endo a start, possibly. I know we played the cup game earlier in the season against Southampton away from home, didn't he? I think he played centre-back, so possibly that won't happen again. But, you know, I can see a world where maybe he comes in at the end position and maybe deputises for Gravenberch in that game and allows him maybe even 70 minutes off the pitch where, you know, he can kind of regain his strength for the PSG game coming up in midweek.
Yeah, we've mentioned a few Liverpool players now that played well. It wasn't a perfect performance. I think, you know, Diogo Jota and Luis Diaz, possibly Mohamed Salah as well, should have maybe done a little bit better in terms of holding the ball up and, you know, allowing Liverpool to get themselves up the pitch. It was the kind of game that I think Sadio Mane, back in his prime years, would have been absolutely perfect, really, to just hold the ball up and be able to drag everybody up the pitch and just give you a little bit of a rest for a few minutes. But obviously, part of that was that Liverpool's front three didn't maybe perform to the level that they have done at certain times. But I'd rather focus, I think, on how good PSG were, because I think it wasn't just that those front three had a bit of an off day. It was more the case that I think PSG were just incredibly good. I think we probably expected them to be good going into it, but it's quite hard to gauge when you look at the league and the teams that they're playing week in, week out. How good are they going to be? You look at the Champions League results that they've had this season. They lost in the group stage to Arsenal, Atletico Madrid and Bayern Munich. So there was a bit of me that thought, you know, maybe this is a PSG team that's almost a flat track bully, but I don't think that really was the case against Liverpool. They've proven how good they were. They didn't score. You mentioned, you know, a couple of players before. Kvaratskhelia in particular, I thought was excellent. Dembele as well was unbelievable. So, yeah, there's lots of quality. The tie certainly isn't dead at the halfway stage. How good do you think PSG were? Are they, you know, up there with maybe Liverpool and Real Madrid in terms of being favourites for the whole tournament, do you think, on that evidence?
I think I was more impressed with them than I've ever been, possibly in this kind of new era that there's been at PSG. You know, obviously, you know, in recent years, they've had the likes of Messi and Neymar and Mbappe, you know, as a front three. But I think this looked more of an all-round team, didn't it? And I think the performance certainly betrayed that, really, didn't it? You know, I was just really impressed with them overall. I think they were so solid defensively. You know, Marquinhos, you know, he's been around the block, hasn't he? You know, we know how good he is. I thought Pacho next to him had a really good game. And the two fullbacks as well, I thought were really strong. We know Hakimi going forward, he's always a threat, isn't he? And, you know, he was one of them who kept kind of arriving late into the box, didn't he? And causing Liverpool an extra set of, you know, problems, really, in terms of that extra body coming into play in that final third for PSG. And yeah, it was just a great performance from them, and I think Luis Enrique's got them well drilled. I think, you know, you look at that midfield. I thought Vitina, you know, it was a bit of an old school box-to-box performance that I thought last night. He was everywhere, weren't he? And I thought Fabian Ruiz kind of doing the dirty work next to him. You know, you always kind of need a player like him as well. So really impressed with them in that respect. And then the front three we've mentioned earlier. You know, they were able to pepper Liverpool's goal, and Dembele, the pace of him. Liverpool, I think, really struggled to contain him down that left-hand side, didn't he, when he did come wide. And yeah, I think Barcola as well. You know, he looked a really strong player, and Kvaratskhelia as well. We know how good he is. So I think the whole team was really strong. You know, it looks a very different team to the ones that we saw in the past kind of 10 years, since there's been that kind of influx of money at PSG. But yeah, I was really impressed with them, and I think for that second leg, like you said before, the tie's not over, and I think Liverpool have possibly really got to raise the game in Anfield, and I think their players and certainly the manager, they seem quite confident coming to Anfield, which, we've seen in years gone by with opposition teams. I think a lot of teams kind of seem to think they can stem the atmosphere at Anfield and quieten the noise, but I think we know that's going to be their second leg. I think Liverpool know they've got a massive advantage now coming into that return leg, and I expect that Anfield's going to be in full voice, I think, for that return leg next week. But yeah, it's one of them, I think, where Liverpool are maybe going to have to ride out what's going to be a tricky game, I think. And yeah, you look at kind of the form guide as well with PSG. I think they're unbeaten in Ligue 1. I think they were unbeaten coming into the game on a long unbeaten run. But like I say, there's been a few occasions in Europe so far this season where they have come unstuck. And Liverpool, they kind of rode out the luck really last night, didn't they? And they got the rewards for that. But I think second leg, I think Liverpool are going to have to raise the game, and I think Arne Slot will be fully aware of that as well.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. You mentioned Luis Enrique's quotes. There was some from Vitinha as well, who kind of said, yeah, we'll go through in the second leg, don't worry about it, which I think is maybe a little bit dismissive of what Anfield can do. Like you say, it's going to be different. How different a game do you think it will be in that second leg? Do you think Liverpool will be able to maybe keep hold of the ball a little bit better? Do you think PSG will find it harder to dominate the possession to quite an extent? I think I'm right in saying it's another record broken in terms of how little of the ball Liverpool had. Do you expect Liverpool to learn from the first leg and be better in the second leg? And I suppose the other sort of angle from that is that obviously Liverpool have a lead. PSG are going to have to go for it at some point, and you'd expect maybe there'll be a little bit more space in behind them as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's been one of the oddities of this kind of Arne Slot team, hasn't it? That, there have been occasions, particularly them bigger games, where Liverpool have lost the possession battle. Arne Slot doesn't seem, as needy in terms of kind of having possession of the ball throughout, and we definitely saw that last night. And to have 30% possession, although it was away from home, I think that kind of, that speaks of just how dominant PSG were in that game. And obviously we've spoken about the answer shots that PSG had in the game as well. And I think often in them massive games, the midfield battle is spoken about an awful lot, isn't it? And I think it's fair to say that PSG very much dominated the midfield last night, didn't he? And I felt at times that Liverpool looked a little bit leggy, particularly in that first half. In midfield, there's been a lot of games for Liverpool, particularly in them cup games as well, and possibly, PSG, that you look at maybe the standard of the French league, maybe they're not having to come up against them top sides every single week, like Liverpool are, and that's possibly maybe the difference, I think, in terms of why maybe PSG had that bit more energy, I think, particularly in that first half. But yeah, I think, the second leg, I think, might be very different. We've seen certain games where Liverpool have been more happy to sit back, even in the Champions League. I remember the Bayer Leverkusen game was one of them, wasn't it, where Liverpool did sit back first half a little bit more, let Leverkusen come onto them a little bit and maybe hit them on the counter-attack. And I think that's always an option for Liverpool. Even before Salah came off last night, there was a little opening there, wasn't there? Maybe tired legs got the better of him. And I think maybe Arne Slot kind of saw that within the game, and that's why he maybe looked to bring off Mohamed Salah in the game, inject a bit of fresh impetus through Harvey Elliott on that right-hand side. And ultimately, he got his reward for that, didn't he? So, yeah, I think we're hopefully a bit of fresh legs if you were able to rest a few players for the Southampton game coming into that second leg. You'll be hoping for a very different performance from Liverpool, I think, in the return fixture.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting as well that Arne Slot said, there were similarities to the Manchester City game. I think in some ways they were obvious, but I think with that being the case, I wonder maybe in the second leg whether he might go with Curtis Jones as well. Obviously, he did that in the first game, in the game against Manchester City. Didn't do that in the first game against PSG. Obviously brings him off the bench and makes a bit of an impact when he comes on in terms of being able to keep the ball and just stem the tide a little bit. I wonder whether that might be something that Liverpool think about in terms of him just being able to hold up the ball. I know people do get frustrated sometimes that he doesn't move it on as quickly as he could do it at certain times, but I think in a game like that where you just need to take the sting out of it, that might be a useful sort of tool to be able to have, really. it's interesting as well that there was no sort of Cody Gakpo in there. Obviously travels to Paris, but then isn't involved. I wonder whether he could have been a little bit more impactful maybe than Luis Diaz on the left in terms of being able to hold the ball. But in both of those ways, really, even if it is Luis Diaz and Diogo Jota again, I think particularly at home with the home advantage, you'd expect that Liverpool would be able to keep the ball, have a bit more of the possession, maybe have a few more spells. I think apart from Harvey Elliott's shot, I think there was only one other shot from Liverpool in the game. So you'd expect them to be able to put PSG under a little bit more pressure. And I think that's why they were just about favourites going into the tie. They're definitely favourites now going back to Anfield with an advantage. Are you confident ahead of that second leg? Do you think Liverpool have done enough in the first leg that they'll be able to sort of hold what they have in the second and get themselves through? Because PSG do seem very, very confident in terms of the way the first leg's gone. But what about you? How confident are you feeling ahead of next week?
I think it's a major advantage, I think, coming into that game, and particularly being able to stem that amount of pressure the Liverpool were last night. To come out of that with a win, a 1-goal advantage coming into that second leg, I think that's major for Liverpool. And, I expect that the crowd to be up for that second leg. And also, like you mentioned before, maybe a couple of tweaks to that starting 11. You mentioned about Curtis Jones. And, yeah, I think you're right there. We've spoken quite a bit on today's episode about, maybe losing that possession battle. And I think what Curtis Jones does give you is that ability to keep hold of the ball ultimately, doesn't he? And I think we saw that the Villa game. I think Liverpool were unlucky to not come out of that game with a win away from home. It was a really tricky game, I felt. And I think he was good on the night there, to be honest. And there have been games where he's come on off the bench since then as well, like you've mentioned. So he's always a player who I think makes a difference in games, and I think he certainly did last night as well. He possibly wasn't as involved as, the likes of Wataru Endo and the two forwards, Nunes and Elliott, who came on, but I think he certainly made a contribution. And you mentioned about Sadio Mane as well. Obviously, we've lost that bit of steeliness, maybe, defending from the front. And I think when Curtis does come on, maybe in that left-hand side position, that kind of left forward position in the front three, he maybe gives you that bit more in terms of pressing, I think, from the front. And that's possibly an option, I think, even for the Southampton game, but maybe even the PSG game, possibly from the bench, if he is to use him from the bench. That's always something I think that worked quite well in the closing stages of the game. But he was probably unlucky not to start the game, I felt, ultimately. And you mentioned about Cody Gakpo as well. He's another who's been excellent so far this season, and he was probably unfortunate not to start the game as well, I felt. But I expect him to maybe be in at the weekend, or failing that, I think I expect him to be in for the return leg next week. So I think he's a player you kind of got to get full usage out of. And, he's a player where when he's sitting on the bench, you're always kind of itching for him to be used. I think, he's such an asset coming off that bench. So yeah, I think there's a couple of tweaks maybe that Arne Slot can be looking to make, I think, for that second leg, just to kind of maximise Liverpool's chances of making it through.
Yeah, and I think if we saw anything from that PSG game, obviously Liverpool have got themselves a chance with Allison, and Arne Slot made the right decisions off the bench as well. So you'd expect him to have learned it. We've seen that, countless times across the course of this season, really, in terms of him making the right choices and the right decisions, whether that's, in terms of his starting 11 or off the bench as well. So it'll definitely be interesting to see what happens against Southampton and how many changes he makes in that game. And then obviously the next couple of games after that, hugely important as well. PSG and then obviously Newcastle at Wembley for the Carabao Cup final. So it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks, certainly. I think that will do us for this week, though, on this Liverpool.com podcast. We'll be back next week around the second leg of the PSG game. The cup final as well is just around the corner. So do stick with us on the Blood Red channel. It's going to be an interesting few weeks, to say the least, for Liverpool Football Club. We'll catch you again next week.